Hi, my name is Hank Wilcox. I'm the Associate Curator here at the National Museum of Military Vehicles. A tank is only as good as the crew inside it. Sun Tzu didn't say that, I just made that quote up, but nonetheless, it's incredibly true. Whether you're in an overcomplicated monstrosity of a tank rumbling across the battlefield or something a little bit more simple, smaller, mass-produced, and easy to use, like our M4 Sherman right over here, it's the men inside that vehicle that make the tank work out in the combat zone. This crew of 5, usually, is going to be working together to coordinate the actions of the tank. They each have their own specific purposes, their specific tools and training to help the vehicle function effectively. And that's really what this video is about here today at the National Museum of Military Vehicles. It's a very special kind of video. We'll be taking you folks inside one of our best restored and best looking tanks right here in the Rotunda of American combat vehicles. This tank will be the M4A3E8 or EZ8 Sherman medium tank. So come along with me as we head down into the hatch of our EZ8 and take a look at what the crew did inside. What exactly is the EZ8 Sherman? Well, if you've watched our previous video on the overview of our M4 Shermans here at the National Museum of Military Vehicles, you might know a little bit about it already, but I'll give you another quick overview about it right now. When we think about our EZ8, many would consider it the final evolution of the M4 Sherman series here during World War II. It's produced in 1944, features the Ford GAA 8-cylinder engine in the rear of the vehicle, which is where the A3 at the end of its name comes from. It also features very prominently the 76mm cannon that we see here, a very large anti-tank cannon that in turn requires a much larger T-28 turret mounted on the top of this vehicle. That larger turret also makes it easier for us to film inside, which is another reason why we chose it for this video. The EZ8, having that larger turret, larger gun, larger engine, is just a tad bit heavier than maybe your normal M4 Sherman, so it's got slightly wider treads to help with that extra weight. Furthermore, these wider treads also accommodate the HVSS suspension system that we see here that's dramatically different than other Shermans here in the Rotunda. But overall, today we're really going to be talking about the interior of this vehicle, the men who worked inside it, this crew of 5 who all had specific roles, but nonetheless were all important to each other to coordinate the overall actions of this vehicle out in the battlefield. But before we do that, there's one quick thing I want to address about the nomenclature of this vehicle that I'm sure some commenters are already rushing to their keyboards to talk about. I can already hear the commenters swinging in from the sidelines. Hank, this label next to you is completely incorrect. They didn't call it the M4A3E8 Sherman. They called it something much longer and more complicated and incredibly wordy. This name right here, M4A3 76mm HVSS-W. Now, of course, this is the type of the tank, the gun that it carries, the suspension system it has, and then finally W stands for the type of storage it carries its ammunition in this case, wet storage, hence W. Now, yes, this name is technically the proper name for our EZ8. It's what's on the data plate in the vehicle right now, but that is what I refer to as the production name, whereas this one, M4A3E8, is the experimental name. When the vehicle was in testing, we referred to this vehicle as the E8 because E stands for experimental, so the 8th experimental variant of the Sherman. Another variant that kind of has this name right here in the museum is perhaps the M4A3E2 Sherman, or the Jumbo. But notice how both of those vehicles, both the Jumbo and this one here, have an interesting nickname, because their nickname is certainly a lot easier than saying, in the case of the EZ8 here, its very long official name. The reason why we call it the EZ8, well, perhaps has 2 origins. First off, we can think about the simple alliteration that comes from saying EZ8, but E, in fact, during World War II was referred to as easy in the first place, whereas nowadays modern military nomenclature refers to E as echo instead. So again, that simple alliteration, it has a much easier way to roll off the tongue than this much longer name that we see here. Another popular myth, or perhaps just simple urban legend that I've heard from guests that come through the museum, is that maybe that HVSS suspension system was a bit easier on soldiers' behinds when they rolled around on rough terrain. Nonetheless, we will refer to this vehicle as the EZ8 for the remainder of the video because it's simply easier for me to say, and I also think it sounds a little bit cooler than M4A3 76mm HVSS. You get the picture. And here we are, the interior of an M4 Sherman tank. I'm just kidding. This is actually a graphic that I yanked out from behind a couple of our vehicles here in the Rotunda. We hid it away when we did a refresh a while ago. But regardless, when we're inside the EZ8 here in a minute, it might be hard to imagine exactly where we're sitting because the quarters are understandably cramped. So what I'm doing here is giving you an overview, or at least an idea with this massive cutaway behind me, of where we're going to be in this tank and the positions that we're covering. So the first of which is going to be the tank commander. He's the guy up here sticking out of the turret of the vehicle. Then we'll move down to the gunner gunner's position. He's kind of hidden here behind the 75mm cannon, and then we'll later move across the way to the loader's position. Here he is prepping a shell to put into the back of this 75mm. And then, of course, we come down here to our assistant driver position, and we'll round it out with the driver's position, along with talking about some bits and bobs along the way. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where we are exactly in this vehicle once we actually get to the interior shots here in a moment. But now I have to go back across the reader rail and all the way over there so we can actually get inside the tank. I'm seated now here in the tank commander's position in our EZ8 Sherman. The tank commander is the most senior member of the tank's crew, and he's also the decision maker. He's the one telling everybody else here in the tank what to do. Most importantly, the gunner sitting right in front of him, especially if the commander can see other threats that the gunner might not be able to see. What I mean by that is the commander has the overall tactical control of the tank because he's got the most amount of information. That comes from a variety of places. For example, the tank commander is first off communicating with other tanks out on the battlefield in a unit of vehicles, because sometimes these Shermans weren't fighting alone. He's able to communicate with other tanks on the battlefield using this radio set that's right behind me here. And the radio set isn't just important for communicating with other tanks, it's also important for the crew to communicate with each other. With the engine being so loud in this vehicle, the crew can't hear each other over the din of combat, so usually they're wearing specialized helmets with headsets built into them that are in turn connected to this radio system, so the commander can speak to them all as if he was sitting right next to them. We do have some headsets right here in our EZ8, like this one that you see next to me, but this is naturally not from World War II. This is a modern edition for when this vehicle used to be a parade vehicle here on the 4th of July in DuBois, Wyoming. That being said, when we think about other sources of information for the tank commander, he's got the best view out of anybody here in this vehicle. He's surrounded by this armored cupola that we see here, which was on later variants of the M4 Sherman. And this armored cupola features these thick armor glass windows which could actually withstand hits from things like small arms or machine gun fire. So of course, just seated here inside the tank, especially with a periscope sticking down from the hatch above me, I've got an almost 360-degree view around the tank, if it isn't just a little bit foggy looking through these windows. But most of the time, the tank commander will opt to be up and out of the vehicle, like what we're about to be here, just like this. Now, of course, I'm currently standing on the inside of the tank. If I was actually sitting on the raised seat in our commander's position, I may actually be a little bit higher. But being outside of our tank like this, the commander has a 360-degree view of the battlefield. He knows where all the enemies are, and he can see things that maybe other men inside the tank can't. And he can immediately shout out their position, or perhaps kick the gunner down here to have him turn the turret fast enough to engage an enemy that may be off to the left or to the right. So most tank commanders during World War II are going to be sitting in this upward position to, again, have that tactical awareness. Now, again, maybe some people are sitting and saying, well, why the heck would you do that? You're going to get shot in the head, and all of a sudden you've lost to the main guy here in your tank. Well, when you think about this tank fighting out the battlefield, especially if it's fighting another tank, the tank commander isn't really worried about getting shot all that much because the tank itself presents a bigger target than he does sticking out of the top of this vehicle. That's at least in open combat. In urban combat, though, if it's moving down a street, for example, and by it I mean the tank commander may decide to duck back into the vehicle and shut the hatch so he isn't attacked by small arms fire or grenades or even just infantrymen down there on the street, which hopefully his infantry escort will be able to take care of. Again, it's a multifaceted position here, the tank commander in our EZ8 Sherman. Now I'm seated just in front of the commander in the gunner's position that I kind of previously mentioned. And of course, the gunner is where technically the action is happening in the tank because he's controlling most of the weapons here on our EZ8 Sherman. In fact, he's controlling not only the 76mm gun right next to me here, but also the coaxial, or at least what we should call turret-mounted, 30-caliber machine gun. That's also right over here next to the 76mm cannon. The gunner has a number of responsibilities, mainly just aiming the weapon and then, of course, firing it electronically. And in order to fire the weapons, he uses buttons down at his feet. The gunner aims all of the weapons using a variety of different things here in his position. First off, to see out of the tank, he's got a specialized periscope right here, which features not only a traditional periscope view, but also this more zoomed-in one, kind of like a mini telescope that allows him to see out of the vehicle and have a more accurate way to measure the range to the enemy. He also has the actual telescopic viewer here, which is just like a big telescope right next to the 76mm cannon, so he can not only see the end of the cannon, but also knows, again, where the enemy is. Furthermore, the gunner is going to be controlling the elevation of the gun using this hand wheel that we see here, and then he controls the traverse of the turret electronically using this joystick, which is connected to the electronic motor in the gunner's position once again. And with this electronic motor active, the Sherman tank could actually turn its turret 360 degrees in 10 seconds, which is pretty impressive for a tank at this time period. But let's say that that electronic system was completely destroyed. Well, now the gunner has to actually move the turret by hand using this hand crank here, and he actually unlocks the hand crank by just simply pressing on this lever. So by pressing on this lever now, the gunner has unlocked this hand crank, and he can simply move it around to turn the turret here in our EZ8. So again, the gunner using all the weapons here in the tank, again, working with the tank commander to know where the enemy is. But he also relies on the loader to have all these weapons functioning, which is where we're going to go next. I'm sitting here in the loader's position in our EZ8 Sherman. Understandably, the loader has the most amount of space out of anybody here in the EZ8 because he's the guy who's got to heft the massive rounds of ammunition that go into the back of our 76mm cannon through a side-facing gun breech right over here in front of me. Now these 76mm rounds were not only quite long, but they also were quite heavy. They weighed 25 pounds apiece, so you couldn't really be a little guy like me back here in the loader's position. You really had to be a strong man indeed to heft those rounds into the back of this gun quickly and efficiently so the tank could have a sustained rate of fire. But where are you getting all this ammunition from here in the loader's position? Well, in the case of the 76mm cannon, it's actually right here at your feet in special hatches down beneath me and also directly underneath the 76mm gun itself. Now, the ammunition storage here in our EZ8, as I said previously, was what we call wet storage, meaning that the ammunition was stored essentially in a large pool of both water and chemical mix, and this mix of water and chemicals was supposedly going to put out things like hot pieces of shrapnel that might enter into that ammunition chamber so that those shrapnel pieces couldn't heat up rounds of ammunition and cause them to cook off and therefore cause an ammunition explosion. At the same time, by cooling down those rounds, it also prevented the risk of a fire. Overall, it increased crew survivability. But furthermore, the gunner, or should say the loader, excuse me, is not just working with the 76mm cannon. He's also working with this, the 30 caliber coaxial machine gun that's again attached to the side of this 76mm gun. He's not only loading and maintaining this gun, but he's also pulling the ammunition from it from these boxes right over here to my left. So again, a lot of things the loader has to do here in his very spacious position, but again, he's got the space to do it, especially here in the larger turret of our EZ8. This is the assistant driver's position here at the front part of our M4A3E8 Sherman. Of course, the assistant driver isn't really doing a lot here in our tank. He's mostly operating this, though, the 30 caliber machine gun that's mounted in the hull of the vehicle. He's also maintaining this weapon and most importantly reloading it using the selection of reload boxes that are next to me here, just more 30 caliber ammunition. However, what exactly was next to the assistant driver would differ depending on the tank. In some versions of the M4 Sherman, for example, such as the base M4 Sherman variant, there may be an entire ammunition rack here for ammunition for the main gun. Other times in command variants of different M4 Sherman tanks, there could be a whole separate radio set here next to the assistant driver, and he'd actually be operating that system so that the commander could actually use it to communicate with overall long-range communications, including other tanks out in the battlefield and command actually back at a command post, for example. So the assistant driver kind of depends on the tank determining for what he's doing, but most importantly, he's also going to serve as a replacement in the off chance that the driver here is killed via a anti-tank shell coming through his position. Another interesting fact about the assistant driver's position is this is where the infamous escape hatch is on any M4 Sherman variant. It's actually right beneath the seat that I'm currently seated on. However, to get to it, I have to not only crank this seat up to an elevated position where, of course, the head of this driver would be poking out so we could see the area around him, but furthermore, you have to actually climb down into that hatch, which maybe wasn't the easiest thing to do in a combat situation. But with that, we'll head over to the driver's position. So I'm seated here now in the driver's position in our EZ8 Sherman. As the name suggests, the driver is simply controlling the vehicle as it moves down the road or down the battlefield. Now, the driver is going to be controlling the vehicle using a very simple set of controls right in front of me here. It starts with these two large handbrakes that you see in front of me. They brake either the left or the right tread of the vehicle and allows the other tread to keep on moving forward and accelerating. In that sense, it simply drags the tank to the left or to the right, and that allows the vehicle to turn. It's cumbersome, I know, but that's really the only way this vehicle can actually maneuver itself out on the battlefield. The only other controls the driver has at his disposal is the accelerator and the clutch. And in the case of depressing the clutch, well, now the driver can activate this. This is our simple gear shift, which is attached to a 5-speed transmission here in all M4 variants. It's again 5 forward gears, 1 reverse gear, and finally a neutral gear. The driver also checks the overall status of the tank by looking over here at his instrument panel. He's got a tachometer. He also has a speedometer and other things like a voltage meter for the batteries in the back of the vehicle. So overall, the driver is really just making sure the vehicle's moving in the right direction, and especially he's maneuvering it in combat, putting it in good firing positions. And again, that's all really informed by the tank commander we previously talked about. So truly, the driver's position, again, is informed by everyone else here in the tank, again, kind of showing the unity of this crew when this vehicle is moving, even in such a simple position as the driver where I'm seated now. Again, as I said at the beginning of the video, you have to remember that it's the coordination of all the crew members that we've just talked about that truly makes this tank effective in the battlefield. Each one has a unique position, but each position is just as vital to the other positions in the tank. Without one, the tank simply cannot function as a whole. Imagine yourself as one of those crew members now. You're in a combat situation. The tank's engine is roaring behind you. You can barely hear yourself speak, let alone think, because of course in your ear, the sound of your commander's voice is crackling through a radio that's pressed up against your earlobe. You're thinking about having to fire this weapon, but at the same time your eyes are stinging from the smoke, the dust being kicked up by this gun now as it's firing, and its shells are being ejected back into the vehicle. You're also thinking about the 30 caliber machine guns, the noises that they're making, and then the sounds of machine gun impacts on the hull of the tank itself. You know you're in danger, but you don't know where that danger could be coming from because your view is restricted. You're maybe only looking out from a periscope or listening to what your tank commander is telling you, and you have to trust his judgment. You have to trust that he's seeing everything from, of course, a hidden tank to a hidden ambush. So there's a lot of stress here in our EZ-8 Sherman. There's certainly a lot of fear, but there's also a lot of moments of valor, a lot of moments of incredible coordination and incredible bravery that these men are putting on in a tank that maybe was well equipped with a large cannon, but maybe not so much in terms of the armor that it had. Again, their lives were constantly at risk. You have to think about the cramped quarters of this tank in the battlefield. You have to think about the noises, the sounds, the smells, and of course, the constant stress, the constant fear, but also those little moments of victory. Those moments where this tank was able to finally destroy an enemy that had maybe come out of nowhere, perhaps completely on accident, perhaps during a planned ambush. To be a tank crewman here in World War II was an incredibly stressful job, but it was one that nonetheless was incredibly unique in its overall experience, a uniqueness that continues even in our modern tank battles today. So again, as we've gone through all of these different positions here in the tank, I implore you to think about what it would be like to be one of them out here on the battlefield and how it would impact you mentally, physically, but most importantly, how it would impact how you feel about fighting in a war such as World War II. With all that chaos inside the tank, the crew was still incredibly concerned about their safety, and with the Sherman having such thin armor all around it, especially right here on the front plate where it's just about 2 inches of armor, well, naturally that isn't a lot of armor on a tank at all. So the crew wanted to maybe add something that could substitute for armor, give them an increased chance of survival, and that's going to come into play with some of the stuff that we just see right here on the front of the tank. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about these crates of supplies that are lashed to the tank's body. These are, of course, supplies for the crew inside. What I'm talking about here is our little sandbags and this plank of wood here holding them in place. These sandbags just provide additional protection for perhaps the driver, the assistant driver's position, because they're going to block things like machine gun fire or shrapnel from high explosive shells. The idea being that if a big shell hits this sandbag, it's going to mostly explode here rather than penetrate the actual hull of the tank. That being said, all these different types of ad hoc defenses, whether it was wooden planks, sandbags, or even track replacements themselves lashed to the side of the vehicle, all of their effectiveness is debatable amongst many historians today. Nonetheless, we've kind of recreated that look here on the front of our EZ-8 Sherman. When we think about our EZ-8, the equipment inside of it also bears mentioning. When you look around at all the different previous shots that we've covered here inside of this vehicle, you can see in the background all different pieces of equipment bolted to just about every single inch of free space inside this vehicle. It's more than just things like ammunition. We have everything from first aid kits to signal flags to flashlights to canteens to water cases to all kinds of grenade storage. And also all the different bits and bobs that the crew needs to survive out on the battlefield. Winter clothing, for example, could be stored inside of this vehicle. All this constitutes a massive amount of equipment that the crew must keep track of whenever they are equipping their vehicle for combat or when they're equipping a new vehicle they've been given for combat. And most importantly, it deducts from the overall space that the crew has to move around and live inside of our EZ-8 Sherman.